Welcome back now to this story out of the Eastern Cape, where investigations are underway into what could have led to the deadly crash that left at least 15 people dead. The crash occurred on the N9 outside Graaff-Reinet in the early hours of yesterday morning. 10 other people were injured in that incident. But what could be the cause of the reckless driving during the festive season with safety campaigns in place? I'm now speaking to the Minister of Transport, Barbara Creecy, who's joining us live. Minister, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Having this chat also under difficult circumstances, considering the story coming out of the Eastern Cape with 15 people that have died in that car crash. What's Minister's response as the department to this particular incident? But also, how do we avoid some of these road carnages?
Aldrin, good morning to you and to your viewers at home. And let me start by expressing my condolences to the families of those who were killed in this horrific accident. And of course, well wishes to those who are still recovering in hospital. The Road Traffic Management Corporation has sent an investigating team to the Eastern Cape to understand the cause of the accident. And at this stage, one would not be able to speculate. But I think, Aldrin, what we do know is that 75% of accidents on our roads are caused by driver behavior. And this would include speeding, it would include the issue of fatigue, and many of the horrific crashes that we see in the early hours of the morning are as a result of somebody falling asleep at the steering wheel. Of course, irregular use of cell phones while driving. And then I think there's the very vexed issue of the issue of pedestrians on our roads. What we know is that more than half, 57% at the moment, of road deaths are actually of pedestrians who are illegally crossing highways or are wandering late at night on roads without adequate reflective equipment.
Yeah, which is a major issue. But here's the other part around this conversation, Minister, is some of these indicators and these contributing factors, they're nothing new. It's been what's been shared before by previous ministers as well, previous MECs for transport as well, and previous law enforcement agencies and their heads. But these carnages are still continuing. What is the problem, despite our safety campaigns from various levels, whether we're speaking about national, provincial, or even local?
Aldrin, I agree with the point that was being made by your previous guest, that enforcement is an important part of changing driver behavior. This year, we have had 61% more roadblocks than in previous years. We've pulled off almost 500,000 drivers. We have had nearly 700 arrests, and we've confiscated 2,000 unroadworthy vehicles. One of the consequences of this enlarged enforcement action is that we're now seeing drivers moving onto alternative routes and using applications that warn them ahead of time of police presence. And we were in a lengthy meeting last night. Tonight I'm going to be meeting with the provincial MECs. And the question we have to address is whether we think that the roadblocks that have indeed been helping us to take unroadworthy vehicles and drunk drivers off the road, whether we also now need to decant some of these operations onto secondary roads, which historically may not have been responsible for the highest number of pedestrian and passenger and driver fatalities.
Yeah. And when it comes to these various applications that do warn motorists of approaching roadblocks and so forth, is there any conversation that could be happening with some of these app companies?
Well, I guess, Aldrin, we live in the 21st century, and we have to understand that you can't regulate every single aspect of life. And this is why, together with the enforcement issues, we have a major public communication campaign around behavior, public behavior. I think that what we want people to understand is, why must you buckle your children up? What is the relationship between the high fatality of babies and small children and the fact that we don't have these children in appropriate car seats and car restraints? What we know is that we have an enormous problem of brain damage as a result of road accidents amongst young children. I was party to a roadblock the other day where I met a young woman who was sitting in the back of the car. She didn't have a seatbelt on, and the baby didn't have a seatbelt on. And when I asked her to buckle up, she was extremely rude and extremely abusive. And she told me that this is her private car, this is her private space, and she can behave in whatever way she wants in her private space. We did have to explain to her that if she didn't put her seatbelt on, we were going to arrest her. But she didn't have a child's restraint seat in this car. So even if she were buckled up, if she were to have an accident, that child would fly out of her arms through the windscreen. Now, this is why I think that enforcement is important, but public education about the consequences of behavior is also important.
Do you think a curfew, as being proposed by the Limpopo government, could be the answer as well when it comes to the sale of alcohol, specifically when we look at the impact that drunken driving is having on the road carnages that we are seeing, and also the pressure that it puts on the public health system?
Well, I think there are two issues here. The first issue that we have to look at is, could we regulate particularly public transport to travel during the day? And I think that this is a conversation that we do need to have. But I suppose that there are lots of externalities in that conversation, including the fact that perhaps there are not adequate facilities to transport everybody who wants to rush home for the festive season during the day. But the other issue we have to think about is, even if we close taverns, people have alcohol at home. And I think that one of and this is why, again, I want to stress this issue of public education. It's not just drivers, it's also pedestrians who enjoy themselves at the tavern. They don't regard themselves as posing a risk to road users because they're not driving. But unfortunately, they are moving across our roads late at night without reflective clothing. And of course, a driver can't necessarily see them until it is too late.
Yeah, so there's that element as well. I remember back in school, I don't know if it still happens, where we were given lessons every week about road safety. Is that still a thing? And the expectation was that once the children get home, they're able to share that information with their parents. Is that still a thing?
My understanding is that in the life orientation curriculum, there are still aspects around road safety. I suppose the question is that when children get home, do their parents enforce the message or do their parents undermine the message? And that's why it brings me back to the fact that we are going to have very sustained public education about safe behavior on our roads. And I don't think, Aldrin, this is something that is going to be a focus from my perspective just of this festive season. I think your previous guest made the point that even if we manage, which we're not doing at the moment, by the way, to reduce road deaths over the festive season, we've got to continue with the public education and with the enforcement operations throughout the year. And I think that this is something that we are addressing as our department. It obviously has enormous budgetary issues, and you know that government as a whole faces budgetary challenges. But in my view, it's something we have to crack because of the human cost and also the economic cost of this terrible death toll and, of course, the related injuries that we are facing.
Yeah, and invariably, Minister, these crashes then lead to applications being made to the Road Accident Fund by victims. And there's an issue that has been raised with the Road Accident Fund, which is around the backlog that it's facing. The judiciary in Gauteng especially complaining as well that some of the civil matters, if you bring a civil matter relating to the Road Accident Fund before any of the courts today, that matter will only be heard 5 years from now. You had asked for a turnaround plan from the Road Accident Fund. Have they furnished you with that as yet?
Well, I think, first of all, just on the issue you're raising about court dates, there have been a series of meetings between the Department of Transport and the Department of Justice so that we can try and deal with the issue of court dates. But I think that there's a more fundamental problem here, and that fundamental problem relates to the system that we have set up, which is a fault-based system. And I think that once you have a fault-based system, you inevitably land up in the courts having to prove who was at fault and who is liable for the compensation. I think that one of the issues that we have to address is we do have to bring back the RAF Act, which sets up a no-fault system, so that there is a system of compensation that is not based on a court decision. Of course, part of the backlog relates to the enormous number of claimants. And I suppose that one of the questions that's related to this is the contingent liability that the state faces. And here again, I think that in the Act, which was not passed in 2017 and that we would want to bring back, we were looking at capping the benefits so that taxpayers' money that comes from the fuel levy can be more equitably shared amongst all of those who would need to be claiming from it.
Yeah. Would this be absent to a medical report that could argue that the claimant actually deserves more?
Well, if you lose your arm, why would I be more deserving than you would be? We would have the same injury. And obviously, there needs to be compensation for pain and suffering. And there might also then need to be compensation for loss of use. But I think that we need to get away from a system that wants to decide that you are a better claimant than I am, because this is the system that is leading to the enormous backlog in our courts and the consequences for individuals. Every single day, myself and the Deputy Minister receive heart-rending stories from individuals who have lost their livelihood, their businesses, their house, because they haven't received the compensation they need and they haven't been able to work. And I think that, yes, we have to deal with the issue of a turnaround strategy and the more effective processing of current claims. But I think we need always, when we deal with problems, to get to the root of the problem, so that going forward, other people don't suffer in the way in which some of the current potential beneficiaries are suffering today.
All right. Minister, just a final one on AXA. We are right now in the height of the festive season, and people leaving the country, coming into the country using our airport as well. One of the problems that was raised last week was with that fuel valve, which we understand that has now been fixed. But the Minister of Transport raising a concern that all of this is happening during the height of the festive season as we're expecting tourists to come into the country. Has Minister had a meeting as yet with AXA, and are you satisfied that AXA's books are in order when it comes to its finances as well? Because there's been another report about AXA failing to pay its service providers.
Well, I don't want to comment on that matter because it's in court, but I think the fundamental issue is that AXA needs to be doing more to improve its maintenance program at airports. The fuel valve issue that occurred last week is a maintenance issue. And one of the difficulties we face with AXA is that they are not spending their maintenance budget as efficiently and effectively as is required. And this is a matter that I have raised with both the management and the board of AXA.
Yeah, and are you satisfied currently with the operations of AXA? And this is with the expectation to process all of the tourists that will be coming through our air border posts.
Aldrin, it's not AXA's role to process people through border posts. And the current holdups at OR Tambo International and other airports at the port of entry are not transport-related matters. They are matters that relate to the Border Management Authority. I have on 2 occasions spoken with my counterpart at Home Affairs about the problems at night at OR Tambo Airport. I was on the phone to the Border Management Authority at 7 o'clock on Sunday night when there were pictures being distributed in the media of extensive queues at that border post. And I have been assured that the Border Management Authority will do more to make sure that when the shift change happens between 6 and 7 in the evening, there is priority given to those who would be in the queues and need to be catching international flights.